people see it after you do it. After you do it, after you realize your vision, then people say, well, yeah, we begin to understand it. But they don't before, and that's certainly true of the case here. In the United Nations, you have 180 countries, 190 countries, and a great majority would tell you that the earth is flat. It doesn't make it flat. And the vilifications against Israel is a country committing genocide and other war crimes. That doesn't make it true either.
Hello everyone, Insightful Nomad here. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at an interview of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with Patrick Bet David of the Valuetainment podcast about the International Criminal Court's case against Israel and against Netanyahu. Let's break it down.
For a person that lived in Iran, I look at the critics and they're giving, hey, let me tell you, it's not fair what he's doing with this. And you see ICC, which the average person, when they see ICC, 124 countries, that if you step foot in their country, they're supposed to arrest you, okay? And they're calling you a wartime criminal, the offenses you've done, the amount of, again, like I said earlier, they're calling it a genocide. How do you answer to the critics that they don't follow politics, they don't follow the stories closely? But if they see if they see 120-something countries that if you land there, they're supposed to arrest you, the average person is going to say, maybe this isn't a good guy.
Yeah, well, they said that about Churchill too. He was a warmonger when he was talking about the German Axis and the danger to the West. He said he warned of the slumber of democracies. And I guess if I learned one thing from our history, the history of the Jewish people, is that you can't sleep. When somebody says they're out to annihilate you, you better take it seriously and act to prevent it. And that's the central lesson that we learned in the rebirth of the Jewish state and the Jewish people in Israel. We don't wait to be annihilated. We take forceful action against our would-be annihilators. And I think that, people see it after you do it. After you do it, after you realize your vision, then people say, well, yeah, we begin to understand it. But they don't before, and that's certainly true of the case here. In the United Nations, you have 180 countries, 190 countries, and a great majority would tell you that the earth is flat. It doesn't make it flat. And the vilifications against Israel is a country committing genocide and other war crimes. That doesn't make it true either. Let me tell you, did you ask me about the ICC prosecution just now? Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you about that. So we were going to have this ICC prosecutor who's since been basically put to pasture. This ICC prosecutor was going to come to Israel in the beginning of the war. And he said, well, Israel has, it has a proper judicial system, and I don't see any real problem there. And he was about to come. And a day before he's about to come, he suddenly cancels the trip. And 2 days later, he issues this war crimes charge against me and the former defense minister. And we didn't understand, why did he do it? It took us months to discover that a few days before that, he was confronted by one of his staff members, a senior staff members, who brought the charges of rape and sexual misconduct that this prosecutor carried out against one of his staff members, a woman, a Malaysian woman, by the way, who's fiercely anti-Israel. But she had suffered this harassment and these rapes for over a year. And Khan believed that this was his ruin. His brother, who's a British parliamentarian, was in jail for sexual misconduct too. So he said, that's it, that's the end of me. And then he figured out that there's one way to get out of this, and that is to deflect the entire conversation, to preempt it by blaming the Jews and blaming the prime minister of the Jewish state. And that,
by the way, this was swallowed up in the sense that if you look at what was being talked about in the podcasts and also in some of the media and so forth, is that the idea was that the Mossad had engineered Karim Khan's sexual misconduct case in order to divert him or to shame him or to put into question his character as he pursued the genocide libel against Israel. It should be noted also, we saw earlier, he didn't even come to Israel, nor did any of the people who were involved in this accusation that was made regarding labeling Netanyahu and defense minister as possible war criminals. He wasn't even here in order to make that judgment. didn't even investigate some of the basic things that were necessary in order to make that judgment. But there are people out there who are saying that this was all a con by the Jews in order to defame him.
Essentially what he did. Since then, you should know that there have been 4 or 5 other women who charged him with sexual misconduct. So what you have here is the ICC, which is a corrupt organization, totally politicized, unelected, that wants to, basically preempt the sovereignty of nations. And that's why the United States is not a member. They won't tell the United States that its soldiers are committing war crimes because some woke people in The Hague are telling you that. This ICC, this corrupt ICC prosecutor, thought that he would escape justice by basically by condemning us. And that's what he's done. And I think a lot of countries are waking up to that. It's sort of embarrassing when your chief prosecutor is doing such a corrupt and heinous thing. But that's the ICC. I mean, President Trump has put sanctions on him. He's put sanctions on the judges who did this. I think he's just facing it. That's what I like about him. He just cuts to the chase. This is a corrupt organization, a corrupt prosecutor, corrupt judges, and it reminds me of that movie. You remember Network? I think.
Yes.
It said, we're not going to take it anymore. And it's not just Israel, because if they target Israel and they say to a democracy defending itself against these savages, you can't defend yourself, then no democracy is safe, and America isn't safe. So I think that's come out. There is extraordinary vilification, extraordinary lies leveled at Israel, and they're meant to prevent us from exercising our right, our legitimate right of self-defense.
That was the interview with Patrick Bet David. It's a Jewish name sounding, but he's not Jewish. He's an Armenian Iranian, right? So there's a huge Armenian minority in Iran. He was born in Iran and grew up in the United States. It's interesting also that Netanyahu's recent kind of media tour is with the new media, with the podcasts. So he was also on Trigonometry and also some other places. So we see more and more how the podcast interviews are replacing the mainstream, CNN-style interviews that we used to see. Regarding the ICC charge there, for me, actually, personally, the whole argument of Karim Khan being this sexual predator and so forth, I don't care as much for that argument. That was the argument that Netanyahu put forth here. I think, though, that it was very interesting how the ICC, the International Criminal Court, when they pursued these charges against Netanyahu and the defense minister, they said, we want to issue a warrant for Netanyahu, for the defense minister, and for Mohammed Deif, who was a Hamas leader who was killed, who is dead already, in one of the Israeli response attacks after October 7th. So it's kind of, again, you see this in order to balance the scales. It's like, oh, we're charging Netanyahu, and we're also charging a dead Hamas guy. You see, we're kind of equal. And of course, they didn't do any such warrants beforehand for Hamas before the Israeli response. It was, directed against Israel. And I think in general, this, the genocide and war crimes accusation, so largely I saw was based essentially on one quote, a quote by the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, which was, I think, hours, less than a day after the brutal massacre and kidnapping which Hamas conducted, where we see all the videos, we see the people celebrating, screaming Allahu Akbar in elation as they butcher people, where he said, in context, talking about Hamas, we're dealing with human animals, right? And we need to kill them. That's what Yoav Gallant said, and they latched onto that. Also in that report, that was the evidence, so to speak, that Israel is dehumanizing the Palestinians and wants to commit genocide. And this was crazy because Hamas had a day earlier an organization with a charter that says wage jihad, destroy Israel, kill the Jews, invaded Israel, murdered all those people, kidnapped all those people. They're the ones who had the genocidal intent. And then a day after that happened, the defense minister says, we're talking about Hamas, right? He wasn't talking about all the Palestinians. He said, we're dealing with human animals. They latch onto that as Israel has genocidal intent. I mean, I don't know any other country a day after that kind of massacre, what type of language they would use. But, if you're talking about Hamas specifically, yeah, they are. That is a correct description of them. They are the most awful, awful human beings. And yes, they need to be defeated and killed, for sure. And that's not any such intent. So, and also Netanyahu there was talking about the ICC being kind of like a captured organization, and we see this a lot in international organizations. Amnesty International issued their report, which begins, the first line of the report is, on October 7th, Israel launched a brutal campaign, a brutal invasion of Gaza. No, on October 7th, Hamas and civilians, by the way, invaded, murdered, butchered, massacred, and kidnapped Israelis. That's what happened on October 7th, which they didn't mention. And everything that happened afterwards was the Israeli response to that. So you see how such an organization can be ideologically captured, can be inadequate, can leave out crucial details, as also the ICC report did, and also be led very often by, you know, corrupt, questionable characters, as in this case. I didn't necessarily agree with Netanyahu putting the focus on that specific issue. I'm not always in agreement with Netanyahu, if you guys have followed my channel in the past, but I do think he correctly identified how problematic an organization like this is. And just because it says international beforehand doesn't mean that they're reliable, and doesn't mean that this can't come back to you meaning in any country, as a boomerang, that when you try to take any type of action against terrorists and against people who want to kill you, that they can come in and say that you're doing crimes. Or that internally, if you try to arrest people who are doing things that you're doing crimes, it can come back to you as a boomerang. And that's why the US wanted nothing to do with the ICC, and why they sanctioned the leaders of the ICC from coming to the United States. So that's all for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you around. Bye-bye.